Dobré odpoledne, dzień dobry, good afternoon. Pracovním jazykem dnešního semináře je angličtina, to znamená, pokud potřebujete překlad, tak vepředu jsou sluchátka, pokud ještě náhodou někdo je nemá. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome you at the seminar Return of Geopolitics, Ukraine and Other Challenges 15 years after NATO Enlargement. When we created the idea of this seminar, it was primarily just a kind of commemoration of this important anniversary, which is common to Poland and Czech Republic. But recent events in Ukraine show that the geopolitical map and the security situation in our region is dramatically changing just before, in front of our eyes. So therefore this seminar is dedicated to a very hot topic actually. This seminar is taking place within a framework of a bigger series which is called 25, 15, 10 Common Anniversaries, Common Challenges, and which is those numbers at the beginning address the anniversaries of this year, that is the fall of communism, the NATO enlargement and our entering European Union. Those anniversaries are common to Poland and Czech Republic, and that's the reason why we launched this cycle. I mean Polish Institute in Prague and the Civic Institute. This seminar has another co-organizer and our kind host here, and I would like to thank Centre for Transatlantic Relations of CEVRO Institute and its director Alexandr Vondra for cooperating with us in preparing this event. Just before the introduction, which will be made by our moderator Petr Pešek, who will be in touch of ruling this event, and I have to say that we were reached by a very unpleasant news at the very last moment. That is our fourth guest, Mr. Pavel Koval, had to cancel his flight to Prague due to some other obligations in Brussels. So we have only 3 guests, but they are very distinguished guests, so I'm sure that this event will be interesting anyway. So, Petr, it's your turn now.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I thank Maciej Ručaj from Polish Institute for saying first words to this seminar. Well, he said the bad news about Mr. Kowal not being here, but we have very distinguished another Polish guest here, who is a leading expert from Poland on Eastern Europe, and who is working as a vice director of Centre for Eastern Studies in Warsaw, which is well known and very influential institution in Warsaw in Polish foreign policy. So I would like to welcome here Mr. Adam Eberhardt. And on the Czech side, I would like to welcome here Mr. Vondra, as was said before, as a director of the Prague Centre for Transatlantic Relations, and well-known person here as a former dissident, politician, diplomat, minister, whatever. And I'm also delighted to welcome here Mr. Jiri Schneider, as a also long-standing diplomat and inter alia former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and now Program Director of Prague Security Studies Institute. Well, and what can you expect today? Firstly, there will be some discussion among our distinguished guests, and after that you will be able to put some as well interesting questions to any of our guests here. So I would start with questions for our Polish guest, Mr. Eberhardt, about development of NATO in last years, because some could feel that our approach to the defense matters and to NATO was somehow relaxed. Maybe even some could see NATO as some alternative to OBCE, to Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, just some hard alternative. But of course, Ukraine crisis have changed this view. Could this unpleasant things happening in Ukraine serve as some kind of, let's say, restart of our approach to security matters?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your kind invitation. I apologize, I cannot speak Czech, so we need to communicate in English, but if there are any questions in Czech, I can tackle it somehow, I hope. Well, you're okay, closer. Okay, when you ask me about, well, your question is directly about the consequences of the Ukrainian crisis on NATO and our community. I would not stick only to NATO, because it is also quite interesting to discuss what's going on with our second pillar of our security, namely European Union. What is sure after several weeks of the crisis, that Russia has dramatically spoiled its reputation in our part of the world among European Union states, and Russia is today widely perceived as main source of instability, unpredictability, and security threat for Europe. So for the first time in the last years, we, member states of the European Union, somehow share the diagnosis regarding Russia. But the key question is, will the common position and will the similar perception of Russian policy lead the West into the similar conclusions? And will it support cohesion among NATO member states and European member states? So to answer your question in this perspective, I would say yes and no. It will definitely serve unity of European Union and NATO states when it comes to our domestic issues. First of all, there will be an end of naivety, of wishful thinking when it comes to relations with Russia, when it comes to all these slogans of strategic partnership, when it comes to all these ideas of collective European security. Hopefully, it will lead to some decisions regarding energy security, which will support a closer integration. Maybe NATO will be back to European politics. And we can already see it when discussing Polish security policy. After a wave of pro-European tendencies, after very common and very widely accepted idea that European Union is our main security pillar, today we are back to a discussion about NATO as one of the two pillars of our security. But the question, when we are talking about NATO, it is also a question about US presence. I doubt the current American administration, President Obama, is able to do a re-pivot to Europe. I have a feeling that American, US foreign policy is not able to return to a former type of activity when it comes to Europe. So it is yes. It is my answer yes for a question, will European Union, will NATO become more united? But also there is a no answer for the question. So even though we have and we share similar perception on what's going on in Russia, even though we share our perception about Russian policy on Ukraine, it does not necessarily lead us to a common position vis-à-vis the crisis itself. We are more united about domestic problems of NATO, of European Union, but there are certainly two different approaches when it comes to Russia on Ukraine. There is a hawkish one, a dovish one, and I think we will have an opportunity to see it in coming weeks when Russia offers some negotiations on Ukraine, and the differences between European countries, between NATO member states, become more and more visible.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Vondra. I think he will be happy to answer it about something what we heard from our colleague about Obama administration and their approach towards Europe. Can you imagine that the approach could be altered now after what happens on the eastern part of the Europe?
I don't know. I'm not here to speak on behalf of the Obama's administration. I can give you some my personal estimate, and this personal estimate is, to put it briefly, I'm not expecting so much from this president, because he missed the opportunities in the past in this respect. There was a situation with Georgia in 2008. Everybody is commemorating this 15th anniversary of the NATO's entry of the three Central European countries, Poland, Czech Republic and Hungary. But it's also the 5th anniversary of this letter to Obama when he was just elected. So in the spring 2009, a bunch of Poles, Czechs, and other Central and Eastern Europeans has written a letter to President Obama, warning him about the situation in the Eastern Europe and warning him to relax, with his intention to relax the power projection in this direction. It was a time when he was still considering about the future of the missile defense and some other important issues. And I even remember that I had a privilege to discuss this in the White House in the summer 2009. I was invited there with one of the co-authors of this letter, was István Gyarmati from Hungary, and we were invited to the White House, and there was an exchange with Michael McFaul, who was at that time the Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, and the man with whom we have known from the past. I had a high esteem about him because he was among those who were helping us in paving the road towards the NATO enlargement. But this meeting, it was a disaster. We were trying to advocate our letter. He was trying to advocate the policy of reset. We expressed our skepticism that the reset in a form, offering some carrot to Moscow, which plays usually according to the rules of the power politics rather than anything else. And in that respect, this title of the conference, which was elaborated by Maciej Ručaj on the return of the geopolitics, whether there is a return, I would say there is no return, because the geopolitical thinking in Moscow has never left the scene. So this meeting with Michael McFaul has ended in almost a physical conflict. That's for the first time what I could enjoy something like that in Washington, D.C. He's a bit emotional guy. And quite recently, because later on Michael McFaul has been sent as the American ambassador to Moscow, and 4 weeks ago I was visiting the Brussels Forum of the German Marshall Fund, and he was also among the friends of the German Marshall Fund, so he was invited there but could not come, but sent a letter to Brussels 5 years after, basically expressing his sadness what's happened in the Ukraine, and expressing a hope that this new Cold War, and now I'm exactly quoting, that this new Cold War would not last as long as the first one. So I think that's where we are. But it's serious, and now to conclude my introductory remarks, I think we must do our best to work with the Americans and to try to convince them, either Obama or his successor, to take NATO seriously again, because I am deeply convinced that Europe and America needs each other more than ever before.
Before going back to Ukraine and NATO, you mentioned Georgia, but Georgia happened during Bush administration. We know he was lame duck in that time, but still, wasn't it some first step or some that the Russians tried to do something which they repeated now in, let's say, a more aggressive way? Wasn't that the first mistake hidden there?
I think that the first real mistake by the West was the NATO summit in the spring 2008. I consider the year 2008 as a kind of a turning point. The decade before, so what we have known and remember from 1990s, and even, yes, the 2001 9/11 was a kind of a breaking point. But even after that, the West, so the United States, Western Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, we all were in offensive. We were setting up the agenda. We were moving first. But in 2008, somehow everything has changed. Since that, we are just reacting. The others are setting the agenda, either Chinese, Russians, even sometimes Indian or Brazilians, and West is only inward looking. Certainly there is a role of the Western economic crisis, which started in 2008. But even before that, when there was a NATO summit in Bucharest, two countries were approaching this summit with the intention to obtain the membership action plan from NATO, so the roadmap how to get in, and it was Ukraine and Georgia. And because, as you mentioned, the outgoing President Bush was already in the lame duck situation, so his term was expiring and the Americans had the elections in the fall, he was not strong enough after all what has happened before, to push this through. He was pushing through the missile defense, but he was not strong enough to push these issues through too. And the Germans, the French, they stand against that. In fact, in the exactly same time, there was a meeting between American President and President Putin. He was president or prime minister in 2008, but it was with Putin. And Putin, it's quoted in the literature now, has expressed his opinion that Ukraine is not a state in the spring 2008. So why should be granted with something like MAP? If you express this kind of a weakness, logically, Vladimir Putin and the Russian establishment has explained this as that they have the green light to go forward. And they immediately did it with Georgia. It took 3 months just to the war, which was provoked by the Russians. And Misha Saakashvili, the Georgian president, it's difficult to convince Georgian, to stay calm if you are exposed to provocation. To convince Czech to stay calm, it's easy. But to convince Georgian when everybody has a rifle in his apartment, it's difficult. So the war started, and it took a few days, and it resulted that the Russians took about 1/4 or 1/5 or quarter of their territory. Did it during the Olympic Games. It was the Olympic Games in Beijing, and now, after regaining more strength, so he started with the larger country, and that's Ukraine. So nothing new under the sun.
Now I have a question for our third guest, for Mr. Schneider. Back to Ukraine. Now, as we see in the eastern part of the Ukraine, it's still not ending. It's maybe still evolving and escalating. So, do you think that the Ukraine crisis is something more than a rain shower, something more than just a short crisis that will fade away? And in which way it can change geopolitical situation in Eastern Europe, in Europe itself?
Good evening, or good afternoon, late afternoon. Thank you for easy question. But first of all, it's definitely a small rain or shower. It's a storm, and it's not happening here. But you know that you feel storm when you are close to it. So it's a storm, and I'm afraid I will not, use the words new Cold War necessarily, but it's really serious. The problem is that, of course, Ukraine is a partner country of NATO. It's not a member of alliance. So it says that clearly that Ukraine cannot count, whoever is in power in Ukraine, on the same guarantees as the member states of NATO. But it's a member state of other organizations which now seems completely vague. And this is OSCE. The whole system of principles of that borders cannot be changed by force. This, which has been agreed, by the way, during the Cold War in Helsinki in '75, it has been broken. Russia has suspended the military part of OSCE Helsinki process, the Conventional Forces Europe agreement about the numbers of the troops in various locations of Europe, which were created as a kind of confidence building between the countries. It has suspended it, by the way, in 2008, in the year Sasha has mentioned. So the problem is that not only, by the way, the problem with the Bucharest summit was that in the end, the compromise which was expressed in the declaration of the summit was ambiguous, unreliable commitment, because it stated that both Georgia and Ukraine will become members. But at the same time, it didn't provide the plan. So it was exactly unreliable commitment. And our problem now is we have unreliable commitments within OSCE, and what we have to secure is reliability of NATO, at least for its members. So that's why it is vitally important to make Article 5 real, not just on the paper, as it is sometimes said, Because what makes Article 5 real is military planning, exercising, because this makes it credible. If you have it just on the paper, it has the value of any international treaty, which is not a high value. So that's why I'm speaking about the storm, because I think this is serious and we have to fix the boat. And in this, we have to be cautious and avoid wishful thinking. Although I'm afraid, Adam, that wishful thinking will stay with us. There will be always people who will incline to wishful thinking. Be it about Russia, see it from the better side, be it about ourselves. But we should avoid creating illusion that we can do more for Ukraine than we can do in reality. At the same time, especially a country like Czech Republic should be particularly cautious and sensitive. It's coming, there's going to be some negotiations. But it should be always with the full-fledged Ukrainian participation. Because we know what it is about when other countries talk about the third country. And I'm afraid some people in this country, I also agree that Russia should be at the table. I mean, it doesn't make sense to have any reasonable settlement without Russia. It's a part of the game. But it shouldn't lead us to the opinion that it's just between Russia and the United States and maybe some few, others. We should be very, very vocal on this. So what we can do is, in this, which is not ephemeral phenomenon, I hope the situation might calm down in Ukraine. I'm not sure it will. But as for the consequences of this crisis, I'm afraid it wasn't just a rain shower. It was a real storm. So we have to fix our boat, and we have to be clear what we can do to those who are not on the boat, and what they can expect from us. And in all this, I think we need United States and Europe closely cooperating. We need Czech Republic and Poland closely cooperating in a smaller scale here. What is worrying me, I just read when I came here the polls, opinion polls in Germany. Which was, they were asking, are you for strengthening militarily Eastern members of NATO in the situation? It was only 40% in favor, 53% against. And the second question is more worrisome. Are you for Germany to be part of this? Should Germany take part in this strengthening of military defense of Eastern members of NATO? It's only 35% in favor. I'm not criticizing Germany. I'm afraid if such a poll would be in this country, it wouldn't be that much different. So there's a huge homework that we should ring the bells on the boat and say, wait a minute, I mean, if there is a storm, we have to show our ability to work not only on our side of the boat, but on the other side of the boat, because this might be dangerous if there will be a hole. And that's why again, I'm coming back to your question. For us, this shouldn't be just a rain shower somewhere far away. It is a serious challenge to NATO, And by the way, I think it's good. It's a wake-up call, because we shouldn't celebrate. We should look forward and say how we should shape NATO, not to become an empty shell. This wasn't the purpose we were entering NATO. We wanted NATO to be real and not an empty shell with no real guarantees.
You were talking about fixing the boat. Would such fixing the boat, and probably it's not a question only for you, but for all of you, would it be membership for Ukraine? Just in terms of, let's put aside some feelings about what happened in Kiev, but from the real politic view of things, would it make situation calmer in the future, or would it make, on the other hand, some present instability in the region?
I think we should make credible what we have promised in Bucharest. I mean, there is no sense to repeat and make it stronger. No. On the other side, it is absolutely unrealistic to, it's not about inviting country, but it's about a country applying. The country should be in a state of, which is ready to become a full-fledged member. And the Russian strategy is clear. It's just putting shoe into the door. You know it. Somebody's knocking door, you open the door, somebody puts the shoe into the door, and you cannot close it. That's exactly what Russia is doing. This is Abkhazia, Ossetia. Clearly, at least in one of the member parliaments of NATO, if Georgia would be, in the process of accession, will say, what kind of territory you're talking about? Are you talking about the whole Georgia or without these territories? The same goes for Transnistria in Moldova. Moldova doesn't seek NATO, it's declared neutrality, and the same goes for Ukraine now. Questioning territorial integrity. That's what Russia is trying to do in applicant states. So it wouldn't make any sense to loudly speak about inviting these states, because it just causes laugh, because, this is not ready. Russia is also questioning our integrity, but it's not territorial. It's our own integrity. And we should be aware of that. It's about cohesion, political cohesion of NATO. That's what I was meaning about this poll. So I'm very much, for a normative, idealist discourse, but it should be credible. And sometimes, by raising expectations, you may cause more harm. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do anything for Ukraine, but not through offering membership. There are other tools how to do that.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Eberhardt would like to
add something? I fully share what was just said about NATO. I'm afraid it's not part of the solution of the current crisis. I have the most recent public opinion polls coming from Ukraine, which were conducted by Gallup and American Republican IRI Institute, and they showed that there is a huge increase of support of NATO, which is quite obvious given the state of affairs in Ukrainian-Russian relations. 33% support joining NATO, while 44% oppose. It is an increase, I say. But if we take different parts of Ukraine, it shows that only 11% of people of southern Ukraine support joining NATO, while 52% oppose, and only 14% of people of eastern Ukraine support joining NATO, while 67% oppose. So my argument would be we should work out solutions which would not end up in splitting Ukraine, but making it stronger and more effective. And my feeling is that European Union might be of use, and association agreement is quite an, I don't know whether it would prove to be an effective tool, but at least is a tool we may somehow try to use. I fully agree that we should be reluctant to offer illusion that we can do more, and we should be reluctant to provide Ukrainians with unreliable response. But my feeling is that even if we granted membership action plan to Ukraine in Georgia in 2008, it wouldn't change the situation, because Russia would be even more eager to show us that our paper assurances are of no value, and they can easily show that we are not willing, and there is no political will among European Union states to support Georgia and Ukraine. It is quite interesting to notice that President Saakashvili was accused that he failed to stay calm in 2008, while Ukrainian government of today is being accused of being too calm when it came to crisis of Crimea. And the response from some member state is, oh, we can't help you if you are not able to take care of yourself. So it shows certainly that if there is no political will among European Union states, no paper, no documents will improve the situation. But NATO might be and might serve as an instrument element of building a stronger cohesion among NATO and European Union states. It is what should be cherished in coming weeks, although I agree that President Obama may be perceived as a lame duck president, even though it is 3 years before his end of his term. You know, 2 weeks ago, I spent several days in Washington, D.C., and I had meetings with scholars in very different think tanks, and all of them expressed their frustration with U.S. policy on Ukraine and Russia. And what I heard was that a slogan, Putin must stop, sounds as unconvincing as a slogan, Assad must go, several months ago. So it is a problem what we are observing. But at the same time, if I may just comment one more thing, I'm quite puzzled. I'm quite surprised by a new Cold War concept, which is quite common recently, and certainly it is catchy. But the problem it has no basis in reality, and not only because Russia is not a global competitor when it comes to politics, when it comes to economy, when it comes to military. The problem is that a new Cold War would not be in interest of Russia, because it would lead, a new Cold War would lead to a consolidation of the Western community and in its opposition towards Russian government. It would make the West tougher, stronger. It would make the West more assertive in relations with Russia, and eventually it would reveal weakness of Russian economy, of Russia. So what we are observing today is that President Putin tries to threaten us with Cold War in order to achieve something completely different, exact opposite. He would like to European Union and NATO to accept special rights of Russia in the post-Soviet space in order to avoid confrontation, in order to have the for European Union to have a feeling for the sake of peace and stability, we managed to cut a deal with the Russian government.
Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Vondra, if you would like to add something to possibility of Ukraine membership in NATO.
I think on this particular question I do agree with what has been said here. So on one hand, of course, last 25 years we are living in a world when we are honoring basic principle that everybody has the right to determine its future. So after what has happened just in the last couple of months or in the last 5 years, just to come out with a new thesis that Ukraine has no right to go into NATO, it would mean that we would basically annihilate the world in which we were living in the last 25 years and which, in fact, for people of this country was the best time in the history of the Czech society. So certainly this is not the right way forward. On the other hand, of course, it does not make any sense now to solve the institutional architecture in Eastern Europe by this way, because even if there would be a consensus, and there is not any among NATO members to do it, it would take at least 2 years, to go into the finish. And it does not make any sense because the logic of the development on the ground is much faster. So Putin has raised the price of gas by almost 100%. So you does not need to have a high IQ to understand that the process of the destabilization of Ukraine will continue because they have to raise the prices for the population. So that's the prescription or the receipt for the unrest in the eastern part of the country. No later than this winter, the next winter. The same is for the industry, which is again located in the eastern part of the country. And if you raise the prices for the output twice, then they will lose any competitiveness, and that's the only way how they are competing in the world market is the low prices right now. So yes, Rinat Akhmetov, few others can subsidize this for some period of time, but I have the doubts whether they are able to do this for 2 years. So this is not going to solve anything, this debate whether to offer them the NATO membership now. But, of course, it's the invitation to play with the same card like is the playing the other guy. So, maybe to speak without those great visions like, who is going to be the member of what, maybe even to speak much more softly, but to keep again a big stick in your hand. So, and to regain the trust, the authority, because this is the problem of the West, that it does not have any authority. Exactly, what the Polish colleague, the politicians are expressing some hopes, dreams, what somebody should do or should not do, but then they are doing what they believe it's in their interest, and they are not listening those proclamations. So it's the time now to move with the deeds rather with the words, and where we have to start is with the territory where are the current NATO members, because look, what is the goal of Vladimir Putin? I can judge this only according to his words. So what he has said, that the dissolution of the Soviet Union is the largest disaster in their history, that they do have the vital interest in the so-called post-Soviet space. So it's a classic revisionistic policy, nothing else. And, you know, even here is the clash of the territory, because the Baltic states are, for example, also the former post-Soviet state. They are covered with the Article 5. So NATO simply should start with a very tough policy of the containment and to move the tools for the defense adequately from eastward. And given the fact that, look, I don't know how much Ukraine forces are able to defend their country. It's 6,000, 7,000. It's less than the Czech armed forces. So, I mean, those who are able to be deployed right now. So, even I think somebody should open the debate about deploying some asymmetrical tools too. Containment, it's a deterrence, it's something what has protected Western Europe from the communist and Russian expansion. It was, you know, Stalin was not an ideologue, he was a classic guy of the power. Nothing new under the sun again.
You mentioned Baltic states, and of course there could arise the same problems as we see in Ukraine, especially in Latvia. Are we sure that we are able to defend as an alliance even Baltic states? Mr. Schneider, for example.
I'm sure yes, but it's not only about military deterrence. I think there's a media psychological war going on, and there's a difference between free world and the world which is not free, which is driven by propaganda. So it's very important that the message that the Russian-speaking people, citizens of European Union in Baltic states, are feeling fine, and they have their rights guaranteed, because this is misused by the Russian propaganda. And I've been witnessing this for years. I remember the meeting between EU foreign ministers. It was still under Javier Solana, so it's many years ago, with Minister Lavrov. And he was in a good propaganda tradition, you know, so he was criticized, so he was immediately criticizing, you are suppressing, you know, someone. So you're suppressing Russian speakers he named one of the countries, I don't know whether it was Estonia. It was very important at the moment that Solana and several ministers said, wait a minute, this is European Union, we have the same rules here, and this is not true. I mean, there are courts, there is a rule of law, and I think if there is any problem, we can solve it. I mean, this is not for you to teach us on this. Yeah, we should stick to this. Of course, this has been instrumentalized, and we should be aware of it. But this is our strength. I mean, the EU is a space of law, and we should be self-confident about that. Because otherwise, I mean, we can talk about moving jet fighters and other military means, and this is what I mean by that I said Russia is not questioning our territorial integrity, it's questioning our integrity. So I think we should be able to be self-confident about our identity, and here EU has a role. It wasn't mentioned, but if EU would be able to pass a kind of small amendment to the energy package, which would say that we are phasing out the bilateral contracts on gas, and that the European Union from year 2020 or something like that, it cannot be done from day to day, will buy a gas from anyone at its borders. And not just, according to the, deals which has a special clauses. This would be an achievement, because then it would be a Slovak sovereign right to reverse the flow of gas to Ukraine, which now Gazprom, based on the contract with Slovakia, is preventing from doing. So it's not a sovereign business. It's not a business as usual, as Russians say. If that would be a business as usual, then it's no Russian gas, it's just gas. And there are business people who are selling gas. And they sell it at the border of the Union. And they get money. And that's what they are interested in. But there is no other string attached to it. That would be the business. That would be the huge achievement. Do you think the EU is able to agree on that? I leave it to you.
Well, speaking about European Union, probably the best person to answer this is Mr. Eberhardt. What we saw in Kiev before Ukraine crisis escalated was a very active policy of Weimar Triangle, of Poland, France and Germany. Do you think that it can serve as a model for the way how the European Union will in reality deal with foreign policy problems? Because as we see, the special representative for foreign and security policy is not working as we would like to see.
No, I don't. I think that we should have some kind of a coalition of willing within European community, countries which are more interested in particular cases. I think that such missions, including several ministers, may serve as missions ad hoc in order to serve some particular issues, but it might not be institutionalized. It can't. But what I would like also to say, just to comment what was said, that today by deciding about our reaction to Ukrainian crisis, we are also somehow defining our deterrence capability when the crisis one day affects not only our direct neighborhood, but also our community. So, and we well know that the crisis is not about the conflict, is not over Crimea. It has never been, because Crimea for Russia is just an appetizer, just a starter, if everything goes right. And it might be a consolation prize if it doesn't. It is also not only about Ukraine. It is about a new geopolitical architecture of Europe, and 100 years after a First World War, we are somehow coming, Russia would like to come to return to a period 1815-1914, to a period 100 or 100 plus years ago, when there are some European powers which are entitled to take decisions on European continent. And my feeling is that today the most important challenge we are facing today is not to accept a solution which is advocated by the Russian government, which would be having one table, having European Union, having United States, having Russia, and certainly having also Ukraine, but not by the table, but just as a main course. So this is to be firm and not accept any partition of Ukraine. Because, it sounds quite normal, federalization. Why not? Russia is formally a federal state, Germany is a federal state, United States is a federal state. But by pressing Ukraine to carry out a constitutional reform, Russia does not want decentralization of Ukraine. Russia would like cantonization of Ukraine. Russia would like to transform Ukraine into a failed state where the Russian government would be able to corrupt local elites in Donetsk, Kharkiv, Luhansk, and to influence the decision-making process in Kiev by those groups in power. So the question which is today on the table is how not to get engaged into a political dialogue which would serve an opposite way. So my first piece of advice would be what European Union should do is do no harm, at least, if we are not able to support integrity of Ukraine.
I cannot not to ask a question which was around during the time of beginning of the Ukraine crisis about the EU approach to the Kiev, about Ukraine and its own role or its possible role in the Ukraine crisis. What do you mean about that? Was that some let's say nonsensical approach from the European Union, from Brussels, or from some member countries to the Kiev, which forced the situation to this escalation and to the point where we are now? It's a tricky question.
We are missing one member of the European Parliament here, so maybe it's a time to quote another member of the European Parliament. I have noticed that Hinek Faimon somewhere has said that European Union of 500 million people is asking the United States of 300 million people to help the Europeans with the Ukrainians against the Russia of 150 million people. So that's a metaphor. Seriously, I think it was terribly mishandled by the European Union in the last couple of months. There were many parallels exposed to what has happened in Ukraine. Somebody has compared this to 1968, somebody has compared this to 1938, somebody has compared this to a discussion between Stalin and Roosevelt at Yalta in 1945. That was, among others, a time when suddenly FDR surprisingly asked Averell Harriman, look, Stalin is a guy of the 19th century. We did not know that. The same has told about Putin, both Obama and Merkel just a few weeks ago. But back to those parallels, there is another parallel which has not been so much used in the Czech discourse, and that's the parallel with 1956, when John Foster Dulles and the other people in Eisenhower administration were inviting the Eastern Europeans to revolt against communism. The Czech did not listen, but for example, the Hungarians were listening newly established Radio Free Europe broadcasting, and they did, and then nobody helped them. So isn't it a bit of parallel what's happened with the Ukraine? The European Union inviting Ukraine to sign the association agreement, but at the same time not being ready to pay the price for this. So Putin came and overpaid very quickly. Another example, it was already a pretty tough situation on Maidan when those three ministers came there to mediate this agreement between Maidan, between the opposition and Yanukovych. But they have reached some agreement. But then, you know, if there is such an effort, so I would expect Merkel and others to come there and to say, look, we have won. But nobody like this has happened. So a 26-year-old guy in Maidan simply said that fuck this agreement. And the agreement was broken. So I think it's a series of mishandling. You know, I don't want to be ultra-critical. Simply, the problem is that in Europe, simply the politicians has lost its understanding. What does it mean, the power politics? And then, if they are confronted with the power politics, they don't know how to behave. You know, they were eager to dance in Maidan just because in front of the TV cameras. But then, if you must pay something, nobody is ready. If you need to show some tough face and to do something to fight, nobody is ready. So then maybe we should be more careful in inviting the others to the lunch if we are not ready to pay for the lunch. That's simple as this.
I would slightly disagree with Sasha. I think we were caught by surprise. It was a surprising development. And you would be right if Yanukovych would have signed the agreement and the European Union wouldn't deliver. But that was just the opposite. He didn't sign, and that triggered the whole thing. As for the crisis management later on, I think it's you're right. But this is structural. I think the whole EU has been, repeating to the extent that we believe in it now in Europe, that we have actually avoided power politics. We have taken power politics from Europe because that's the recipe how we keep Europe in peace. And we are integrating and we don't use power politics inside. You know, that's the mantra we keep repeating and we tend to believe in it. And so we've cultivated ourselves to the sense that we are not ready to go to the jungle. And there is a jungle outside of the European Union. There is a power politics outside of the European Union. And we in European Union, we from time to time, somebody is shouting on somebody else. It's called twisting arms, but there is no physical contact like in White House, or with Mike McFaul. But we call it twisting arms, and this is something unacceptable. But basically it's very cultivated. And it's not compatible with the style, with the power politics, which is used outside. How to solve it? To have a club where you have a very, very soft, behavior inside, but you have bodyguards, at the door of the club. I mean, the real gorillas, That's the only solution. Or coming back to the power politics inside, it's a real problem how to do it. Of course, it was a bit technocratic, these thick, papers. There was no communication about what this is about. And I would argue that the problem is that there is no unity, because some of the countries would never sign or, under subscribed to the idea that in the end, Ukraine might become a member of European Union, which was something the Ukrainians were, asking from the beginning. That's why we created a kind of hybrid called Eastern Partnership, which expresses verbis, José Manuel Barroso said, it's everything but membership, excluding membership. Well, this is not fair. It's up to the country's performance, Of course, we may say the country is not ready for membership. But to say that, you're excluding it from the beginning because for some countries this is simply unimaginable that in 30 years Ukraine will be member, that was the mistake. That was a strategic mistake because, we actually said we are not ready.
Well, before giving word to the audience, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions in your hands, I will ask the last question on gentlemen's here. If situation in Ukraine will escalate more and more as we are witnessing today, what kind of response from NATO would be possible, or in which way NATO should answer? Of course, I'm not asking about some intervention or something like that, but some kind of military help to Ukraine army or whatever, or some assurances, because we know how the Budapest Declaration ended, so there is probably not enough. But the state of the Ukraine army is terrible, which is probably close to the reality. So how can NATO help in this situation? Maybe, for example, Mr. Eberhardt.
I don't believe NATO may prove to be anyhow useful in this perspective, because even if we, behind this table, could agree that we should respond firmly to Russian game, there is no political will within European Union, within NATO, to go tough on Russia. So my two advices would be, first of all, stay united, as much united as possible. So it's why I don't advocate harsh sanctions on Russia, because I know it would not be accepted by the community, will not be accepted by European Union. I think it is up to Americans to go tough when it comes to sanctions. They have decision-making process is easier for them. They make use of such an instrument more often than we do. And what European Union should do is to stay united, do no harm. Do not convince Ukrainians that they cannot fire back if Russia enrolls troops. They should. Ukrainians should. We should not accept Russian... And I would like to say that Russia is not almighty. Russia is definitely not almighty when it comes to Ukraine. Russia tries its best to provoke riots in Ukraine for several weeks, and all they can do is to have a group of 1,000 people in Donetsk and Kharkiv. And most of them are visitors coming from Russia who, and it was funny, 2 days ago, or yesterday, 2 days ago, when rioters in Kharkiv were not able to locate the city council in Kharkiv, and they started to assault the building of the theater, and looking for a mayor of Kharkiv in order but it also shows the weakness, not only weakness of these rioters, but it also shows that Russia is definitely not almighty, and Russia cannot achieve all its goals in Ukraine as they plan to do. Okay, we don't know how the situation develops. We know about trade embargo. We know about increase of prices of gas. Maybe it may lead to an economic crisis. It will lead to a deeper economic crisis in Ukraine. It may lead to a social crisis in Ukraine. The real question is whether a social crisis would transform to a political crisis as well. But at this particular stage, we should do no harm. We cannot accept a political solution that would provide Russians with an opportunity to achieve their goals on the table, goals which were not achieved on the streets of Donetsk and Kharkiv. And it is the most important aspect of policy of European Union. I know it sounds very defensive. I know it does not sound good for your question, what can NATO do? Well, NATO can do nothing, I'm sorry.
It was only a question, so you gentlemen, if you...
Briefly, I think NATO and EU should care about themselves because, I mean, this is their primary task. Now, it doesn't mean it cannot be done anything to draw real red lines to Russian behavior without declaring them publicly. And there is one important player who is not particularly happy with the behavior of Russia, and it's very important to Russia, and it's China. And believe me, there is a lot of talks between Washington and Beijing these days. You could see that in the vote of the General Assembly of United Nations vis-à-vis Crimea. Can you imagine? Because for China, the change of the borders and separatism, I think this is a real danger and challenge. And so, under the surface of very vague expressions of China, you might see some nervousness. Beyond, China has an economic interest in Ukraine as well. So I think it's not just NATO when we're talking about the problems of the world. We've entered NATO to be safe, and this is a defensive organization. There are other tools, and we shouldn't put them into the trash simply because they are ineffective. Sometimes they are effective enough, like UN and OSCE. I wouldn't put them into trash. Sometimes they are of extreme value.
Okay, thank you. So now it's door is open for you, for your questions. So please. Well.
Good afternoon. My name is Martin Madej, and I come from the Charles University Faculty of Law. I pretty much like an analogy Mr. Schneider presented with the jungle. I think that European countries are something like a tribe next to a jungle. In this jungle there is a beast, and we have to accept it. When you're a tribe and you're not really well united, you normally, if you're reasonable, you give sacrifice to that beast in some way.
So who's the princess?
What I mean is that we can throw stones and sticks on that beast, but it just might not help us if we are not united. I think that it would be reasonable to think about bringing some sheep into the jungle, give it to the beast, and
you mean Ukraine?
And Slovakia.
And just to buy some time for really thinking about the strategy, about really uniting, about federalization to that extent, so we can really be able to face that beast. So that is my question. Are we really capable of giving that sacrifice, or are we just going to throw sticks and stones on the beast? Thank you.
I'll be brief because I brought this this parallel with jungle. Generally, it is not good to feed the beast. And I'm afraid that the smart European approach, which I dislike, but I'm afraid this is how it should be, is that we will be feeding by small pieces the beast and trying to avoid any sacrifice.
Okay, thank you. Another question?
Just maybe to add something to this. You know, the history tells us that if there is a perception of the threat, that it can serve as an incentive for the integration of those who are threatened. But here, I think it's a kind of a still wishful thinking, because if you would go through entire European Union and measure how it is perceived as a threat, you would get an entire, absolutely different results. You know, if you go to Madrid, you would get a different result than if you go to Riga or to Warsaw. If you go to Dublin, you would get entirely different results than in Sofia. So it's not as easy as one could hope for.
Yeah. Okay. No. I just wanted to say that there were some guys who hoped to get some time late 1938, and all time they got was 1 year and something. But I don't want to compare the situation, but I would like to say that Russia is a revisionist power. It was already mentioned by Mr. Vondra, and President Putin will go as far as he is allowed to go. And the faster he meets the border, the faster he stops. And you know, there is a number, well, if you take number of Russian speakers in Latvia and Estonia, it's about 40% in each of these countries. And when responding to the conflict over Crimea, over Ukraine, we should have in mind, okay, if we allow Russia to be effective in this kind of rhetoric, that they have a right to defend their fellow citizens, if they are right to defend Russian speakers in a neighboring country, it may one day, sooner than later, lead to a conflict over Latvia and Estonia. And we certainly can say, even in Poland, neighboring Ukraine, we can say, okay, Ukraine, it is not our problem, because it is not a challenge for our security at this particular moment. But once it comes to our community, when it comes to Latvia, Estonia, it will be an extremely sensitive problem. It will be extremely crucial problem for the future of European Union and NATO.
One sentence. We shouldn't be dragged by this image of beast. There is a huge difference between, those years which were mentioned, 38, 68, 56. In 68, there was, how many? 8 people demonstrating at the Red Square. This time, it was more than 50,000. Russia is not a Soviet Union of those days. I would make a distinction between Putin's government and Russian society, a very clear distinction. And we shouldn't forget about the Russian society and those who are for freedom, as they expressed, for our and yours freedom. This should be also, this is our strength. We're not weak in this. By being free, we are strong. And we shouldn't forget about that. I was amazed that when I was young, and it was during the communist years, I've heard, not only through Radio Free Europe and Voice of America, but there was a notion that there is so-called free world. And the free world will stand for this or that place. It somewhat disappeared. We're shy to say that I mean, there are countries which are free, which are lucky to be free, who are blessed with freedom, and they should be proud of it. And they should stand for something, because in other countries which are not that lucky, they are people yearning for freedom as well. Maybe they are not in majority, but they are there, and we shouldn't forget about them, because we were in that position also many years ago. So I wanted to, I mean, we shouldn't demonize to the extent that it's a good parallel. I was talking about jungle, not about the beast. So you put it somewhat further than I would go. And I simply wanted to remind us about the Russian society.
Okay, thank you. Another question?
That was a long time to wait for the question. My name is Arkadiusz Kalinowski. I come from Poland. I work here now in Prague, so the Polish voice may be from the other side. I just felt kind of bad when it was said about the beast in general. Even if Putin would be the beast, there are still 150 million of Russians, and just living in Russia, plus all those living in Europe and other parts of the world. When Mr. Vondra, you mentioned that 500 million of Europeans are asking basically Americans for help, I always wonder what we do with let's say, the Russians coming here to, I don't know, to educate themselves, either here to Czech Republic or to Poland, and whether we create any kind of the relationship between us and them that will, in the long term, change or develop basically the relationship between Russians and Russia. Because I'm just wondering if we are talking about the free world, and if coming to Europe, I can really strongly feel the free world, why can't we somehow transmit this free world to the Russians that will come to Russia, and they will say, guys, there in Europe is better than here in us.
Yeah, and the question, please, because...
So the first question would be how to do it, something like that. The second one, I was curious about Slovakia, because you mentioned about the gas in Slovakia. I just wanted to know from the business economical point of view how it works. And there was the third one, I guess. Just a second. SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and treasures. Anything like this for Europe and for Russia at this moment, in this particular moment? Let's say considering that at some point we are going to develop our relationships, because we have to still. So that would be the questions. 3, Slovakia. The second one, how to basically create a community within Europe that will transmit Russians to Russia, for instance, with the freedom, opportunities, and let's say the idea of personal development or the society development in Russia as well. And the third one, if someone is interested, SWOT analysis for our relationships. Thank you.
Not easy questions. Any of you volunteering, answering?
Me? Okay. Well, when it comes to energy and Slovakia, it is the easiest one. If they invest not much, just about $15 million, there will be an opportunity to re-export gas which is transmitted across Ukraine from Russia to Slovakia back to Ukraine. It will go a reverse flow, and it may serve as an opportunity for Ukraine to have less dependent, to make dependence on Russian gas lower. I don't believe European Union will be as smart as having joint contracts in order to buy gas. But my solution would be even easier. If we produce shale gas, if we construct interconnectors, if we apply third energy package, if we make a market, or if we organize a market-oriented market on the gas, and it would be similar to oil market, it would cease to be a political problem, because Russia will cease to have a leverage on us to achieve its political goals. SWOT analysis. Well, I think it is quite early to say what are SWOT analysis for different actors of the game. If you take, for instance, Russia and Ukraine, okay, they managed to take over Crimea. Maybe they will be able to impose an ineffective political system on Ukraine, but there are certainly some consequences for it. Ukrainians become even more anti-Russian these days. It may last for many, many years. So it will be a new paradigm in relations between Russia and Ukraine. There is no return to relations between Russia and Ukraine to 2013, 12, 11, because for the last 23 years, Russians were trying to work out a carrot and stick strategy on Ukraine. Today, carrot would not be effective anymore, but because Ukrainian political class, Ukrainian society becomes very anti-Russian. So Russia will have to make use of stick, and it leads to an even smaller Russian soft power in Ukraine. Take Georgia after 2008 war. Today, trade between Georgia and Russia is just, from the point of view of Georgia, is just less than 10%. So Bulgaria is as important trade partner for Georgia as Russia is. It shows that a strategy where Russia can achieve some goals may prove to be very ineffective for them in the long run. And the same comes to relations between Russia and European Union. Okay, today there are a lot of people within policy making circles, elite, but also societies of European Union who say, okay, Putin goes mad, we have to accept it somehow because in order to have peace and stability. But in the long run, it will spoil reputation of Russia, and it will lead to a situation where an interest in a genuine partnership between European Union and Putin's Russia will go down, will become less and less probable. So, I think it is too early to draw a SWOT analysis, but my feeling is that short-term gains Russia may have don't necessarily translate into a long-term gains.
Okay, if you want to add something.
As for the influence or the debate between people, I mean, we all know, Russians are traveling freely to Europe, to this country, to your country. I remember I was talking to someone, because here there's a remarkable number of Russians, not just tourists, but have been living, longer term studying. And the answer was, well, they are a kind of closed diaspora. They're not engaged in too much of contact. Maybe that's the challenge. I mean, to be more engaged in a debate, to listen to each other. And because definitely that's the case. I mean, if we would take this as voting by where you go, then Russia is very much a Russian elite, or this part of Russian elite is very much Western oriented. But is it so in terms of values, or is it just taking advantage of the good side of the West without taking its fundaments back? You're not the first one to elaborate on that. But it's definitely worth thinking how are we engaged in talking to each other. By the way, how many Russian students are at CEVRO?
Good question. Okay, so another question is here. Yes, please.
My name is Charles Ross. I'd like to ask the distinguished panel to address a factor that has not yet been discussed, and that is the politics of the economics of the use of military in the invasion or accession efforts of Russia in the Ukraine and the potential for its expansion across Ukraine and potentially other parts of Europe. I'd raise this question in light of the documents that have been found and are being published on yanukovychleaks.org and other investigations taking place now about the issue of corruption. I would propose that there is a southern corruption corridor that extends from, perhaps shall we say, the Kremlin. All roads no longer lead to Rome. Perhaps some of them, in fact, lead to the Kremlin. But this southern corruption corridor, or Sokokor, in fact, is a loose affiliation of oligarchs and sometimes outright organized crime that manage, control, and organize certain strategic industries. I think we have to look deeper than the simple military fait accompli sur terre and look at the issues of why is this policy being effective. With the collapse of the Yanukovych regime, it became clear that the Russian government had a problem with certain strategic factories, for example, for helicopter engines, and for guidance systems for intercontinental ballistic missiles, for critical assemblies and multiply independently rechargeable vehicles, and other strategic industry factors of Russian military. But I think we need to look a little further, and I'd like to ask the panel to address the issues in the light of, for example, the almost immediate declaration by the Russian government that all of the gas and oil leases around the Crimea immediately became Russian state property, and the very obvious interest of the Russian government in perhaps a different world to gain control of the serious fracking reserves in northeastern and eastern Ukraine that, in fact, were the subject of a contract between the Yanukovych government and Shell just before the Maidan demonstrations. Thank you.
I don't know, how you want to address the corruption in Ukraine and address in Russia to get the results immediately. I'm skeptical in that. I think it's like to lecture. If try to imagine the United States, for example. You are American, yeah. At the era of the first Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and others, some coming, from another planet to lecture you in 1870-something, about the corruption according to current European standards. The corruption grows in Europe from north to south and from west to east. And it had many cultural, religious and other reasons. And I am afraid that it's not gonna to change at least those two vectors. They will remain so. I cannot imagine to have a better situation with corruption in Sicily than in Sweden. That's impossible, I guess. Knowing, how the Italians are behaving and how the Swedish are behaving, you will certainly, in in the economy, that's another point. We should be able to address this, but the problem starts here. The problem starts among us. One point has been rightly made by the Polish colleague about the energy market in gas. Certainly, it would help very much to open the market in trading the gas. But we can do it. But it means that you have to convince the industries here to allow with that. And then you have to send the money to invest into the infrastructure, because one of the reasons why still there is this praxis of working on those long-term agreements, 15, 20, 25 years, and then somebody can use this as a political weapon. It's the policy advocated because of the need for the investment. And given just the story, for example, of the Nabucco pipeline and inability of the Europeans to raise enough money to invest into that pipeline, can serve as example how it's difficult. Another issue could be mentioned, and that's the story of the shale gas exploration and mining. United States are doing this, but in Europe it's almost impossible. We are building a Yellowstone National Park from the Euro-wide National Yellowstone Park, so then it's tough, of course. Nobody, wants the industry here. We want just the tourism, we want the leisure, ideally without the corruption. It's an Eden, we are building a paradise, and then, if you have a beast coming out of the jungle, so you want to give him a meat to to leave us free, that's the world, I'm afraid, does not work like this. So, yes, we should put more economy in, but I'm skeptical, for example, those sanctions is nothing, That's the Americans and the Europeans, they are asking their embassies in Moscow to create a list. So ambassador call a junior diplomat, and he makes a list of, put the names, he does not like, and that's it.
But okay, Mr. Eberhardt.
If I may, on this. This is, the interdependence, economic interdependence between Russia and the West is obvious. Now, I don't like this notion about the sanctions. This is an exceptional thing, and it's more of symbolic nature than of real one. But what matters is the way the business is done. And there's something like, risk assessment for business. What kind of business risk is there? Regulatory, corruption, change of the exchange rate and these kind of risks. I would calmly calculate these kind of risks and try to reduce them without, fighting, the phantom of corruption. No, we are just, let's talk about reducing risks, And that's a basis where I think in long term we can agree that there is a common interest in the long term. Because Russia needs modernization, needs foreign investment. It should be a credible partner. More than $100 billion have left Russia in the first 3 months of this year, which is more than the whole last year. Okay, he can sustain it, but I mean, it's not good. It's not good. It's against Putin's policy. Putin wanted the capital not to leave Russia, but to come back. The stocks were down. I mean, the brokers said to me, if I was trying to talk to one broker, you know, about it, I mean, isn't it serious that it's 10% down? And he said, well, you said 10% down, time to buy. I mean, it depends what kind of risk you want to take. If you're a risk taker in the West, well, of course, Russia is a bonanza. High risk, high gains. But if you're a cautious member of, you know, a shareholder of a company which is listed, and you have to behave responsibly, then you try to reduce the risks. And it's again about us and how responsibly we behave in business. So I wouldn't put it in the sharp terms, you know, no business with Russia, sanctions. No, let's calculate the risks. And I'm absolutely confident that this is not helping to reduce the risks of doing business with Russia, what is going on in long term. So those who are interested in this long-term view, maybe Mr. Putin is not, but maybe there are others who are interested, they should care about the increasing risk. By the way, it wasn't mentioned, sometimes it is mentioned, that by entering NATO, we, Poland and other countries, have got extreme, not visible, but we can feel the bonus in reducing our business risk in these countries. That was the bonus we've got. So it is how security and business are related. It's very difficult to calculate that, but it's visible. And for Russia, I'm sure this is the same thing. I mean, this kind of adventurous behavior, I mean, will be reflected in the increased business risk.
Okay, so please, Mr. Eberhardt.
Yes, well, just on a different part of the question. You know, I think that any crisis is certainly a challenge, but it may also serve us as an opportunity. And when have we started our European Union energy policy, which leads us to liberalization of gas market? It was just after 2009 Russian-Ukrainian gas dispute. It served us as an impulse in order to work out some solutions for future. So if I'm slightly optimistic, it is because I believe that any crisis may serve as an opportunity. When it comes to corruption, I will not discuss corruption in Russia because there is no time to elaborate, but I will focus on corruption in Ukraine, which is also a subject of longer discussion. But I would like to say that both revolutions in Ukraine, Orange Revolution 10 years ago and the Maidan Revolution last year, they were all manifestation of the people's desire to break with the oligarchic corruption, old bureaucratic system of Ukraine. And it was a demand by people to change the system of Ukraine. And as for now, they are not so successful. Take the presidential candidates for upcoming presidential elections in Ukraine, and you will have Yulia Tymoshenko, the gas princess, billionaire. You will have Petro Poroshenko, a chocolate king, a billionaire. You will have Tychybko, who has also assets over $1 billion. And you know, and there is also an additional problem today. Today, Ukraine is struggling to stay as a unitary state. And Ukrainian government in Kiev is in a desperate need of gaining support of large, strong oligarchs from Eastern Ukraine. Some of them are serving as new governors in some districts of Eastern Ukraine, and one of them is not collaborating with the new government. It is Rinat Akhmetov. And if we are facing some problems in Donetsk in the last 2 days, it is because Akhmetov is playing his own game, which is somehow against the incumbent government in Kiev. So it shows us how difficult it is to carry out the promise, to deliver the promise of a change of the system in Ukraine, to get rid of all this oligarchic bureaucratic system out of power, but at the same time to meet the basic needs of Ukraine, because you cannot achieve both at one time.
Okay, thank you for final word. I think we had very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you all the panelists here, Mr. Eberhardt, Mr. Schneider, Mr. Vondra, for coming here and sharing their interesting views. And of course, thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for visiting, coming here, listening and asking the questions, and hope you will come again for some another discussion here in CEVRO. Thank you very much. Good evening.